There are some 250 million cars in America, 250 million cars in the country with just over 300 million people. And most of those vehicles, of course, are gas-powered. This poses a huge challenge given the limited supplies of oil and the growing urgency of the global warming crisis. But there is good news, according to our guests today. And that is we have the know-how and the technology to build sleek, fast automobiles that don't use gasoline. These vehicles of tomorrow are powered by hydrogen, electricity, biofuels, and digital technology. And they already exist. So what's stopping us from putting them on the roads? Our guests today will help answer that. Dave Hackenberg, a beekeeper since 1962, can usually tell what killed his bees just by looking at them. If they're lying on the ground in front of the hive, it's probably pesticides, he says. If the bees are deformed and wingless, it's probably vampire mites. But last fall, Hackenberg saw something he had never seen before. Thousands of his bee colonies simply disappeared. He was in Florida at the time, pulling the lids off some of his commercial hives. To his horror, they were all empty.
Lowry is famous for painting scenes of life in the industrial districts of northwest England in the mid-20th century. He developed a distinctive style of painting and is best known for his city landscapes peopled with human figures, often referred to as matchstick men. He painted mysterious unpopulated landscapes, brooding portraits and the unpublished marionette works, which were only found after his death. Now that the story's been scratched, it is only part of contingency planning. But it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realized. Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
These two paintings, both called Sunflowers, are generally accepted as the finest of several depictions of the thick-stemmed, nodding blooms that Van Gogh made in 1888 and 1889 during his time in Arles. The first is now in the collection of the National Gallery in London, and the second is in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Van Gogh referred to this work as a repetition of the London painting. But art historians and curators have long been curious to know how different this repetition is from the first. Should it be considered a copy, an independent artwork, or something in between? Rebuilding carbon-rich agricultural soils is the only real productive permanent solution to taking excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. She's frustrated that scientists and politicians don't see the same opportunities she sees. This year Australia will emit just over 600 million tons of carbon. We can sequester 685 million tons of carbon by increasing soil carbon by 0.5% on only 2% of the farms. If we increased it on all of the farms, we could sequester the whole world's emissions of carbon.
For many years, the favorite horror story about abrupt climate change was that a shift in ocean currents could radically cool Europe's climate. These currents, called the overturning circulation, bring warm water and warm temperatures north from the equator to Europe. Susan Lozier, an oceanographer at Duke University, says scientists have long worried that this ocean circulation could be disrupted.
Financial markets swung wildly yesterday in the frenzied trading market by further selling of equities and fears about an unraveling of the global carry trade. At the same time, trading in the US and European credit markets were exceptionally heavy for a third consecutive day. London trading was marked by particularly wild swings in the prices of credit derivatives, used to insure investors against corporate defaults.
Nanoscience is the study of phenomena and the manipulation of materials at atomic, molecular and macromolecular scales, where properties differ significantly from those as a larger scale. Nanotechnologies are the design, characterization, production and application of structures, devices and systems by controlling shape and size at the nanometer scale. So I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about what a nanometer is, but loosely speaking, people think of nanotechnologies as being a sort of 100 nanometers or less.
Brooke and her colleague Mark Newman studied who swapped messages with whom on a popular online dating platform in the month of January 2014. They categorized users by desirability using PageRank, one of the algorithms behind search technology. Essentially, if you receive a dozen messages from desirable users, you must be more desirable than someone who receives the same number of messages from average users. Then they asked, how far out of their league do online daters tend to go when pursuing a partner? I think people are optimistic realists.
Okay, so let's have a quick summary, cause we've galloped through a bit of philosophy here. I've suggested that we're rationally required to do what morality requires of us, so it's a reason that tells us what we should and shouldn't do. If we don't do what rationally requires of us, this is because we're ignorant, or, if you don't agree with Aristotle or Socrates, we're possibly weak or corrupt, and we may be ignorant of what morality requires of us because we're on others. So what's all this got to do with climate change?
Daniel Harris, a scholar of consumption and style, has observed that until photography finally supplanted illustration as the primary means of advertising clothing in the 1950s, glamour adhered less in the face of the drawing, which was by necessity schematic and generalized, than in the sketch's attitude, posture, and gestures, especially in the strangely dainty positions of the hands. Glamour once resided so emphatically in the stance of the model that the faces in the illustrations cannot really be said to have expressions at all, but angles or tilts. Illustrations cannot really be said to have expressions at all, but angles or tilts. The chin raised upwards in a haughty look, the eyes lowered in an attitude of introspection, the head cocked at an inquisitive or coquettish angle, or the profile presented in sharp outline, emanating power, the severity like an emperor's bust embossed on a Roman coin.
Finally, we get a sneak peek of the world's largest interactive video installation that opens in London today. If you walk around Trafalgar Square in the next week, video cameras linked up to a computerized surveillance system will be tracking your every move. As you look down, one of over 1,000 animated portraits could appear in your shadow. These videos were created by people from across the UK who were asked to film themselves for 3 minutes doing something that best represents them. The installation can project up to 14 portraits in the space.
Well, basically just hitchhiking on the point. If you look at the customers at the Wall Street Journal, the basically financial news, financial people here are people who rely on sound, valid and tallied data to make investment decisions. They look at things and track trends in the industry, worrying about things like profit maximization. If they even suspected that political issues and ideological issues from the editorial page were going to start affecting the flow of valid financial information, if they even thought that ideological issues were going to affect their ability to understand investments and make sound decisions, they get very upset.
Study stress among students is a growing concern, affecting mental and physical well-being. The pressure to excel academically, meet deadlines, and juggle extracurricular activities can lead to anxiety, sleep disturbances, and burnout. Coping strategies like time management, seeking support, and practicing self-care are crucial in alleviating this stress, ensuring a healthier and balanced student life.
So, thinking a little bit more about how people conceptualize their way in the world, we can also talk about worldviews such as consumerism or materialism. And these are generally part of the assumed backdrop of our lives. They're part of the normal, and we don't talk about them so much. But we could consider that we might agree or disagree to different extents with the idea of consumerism, an ideology that encourages the ongoing acquisition of goods and services. That is to say, the good life is made up of consuming more and more. You could agree with that to a certain extent or not. Materialism, highly related, is a value system where social status, whether people are high or low status, in some sense whether they're good compared to other people, is determined by wealth, by affluence, and ownership and consumption of goods and services.
It was in the 1980s that many of us became aware that small individual actions could harm the planet itself. Hairsprays were cited as one of the causes of the hole in the Antarctic ozone layer. People were told to wear sunscreen to avoid skin cancer as the layer thinned and more UV light got through. By 1987, world governments had agreed to ban the ozone-eating chemicals. The World Meteorological Organization say at last the ozone layer is showing signs of thickening, although it will be a while before they know if the hole is actually healing. The same organization warned earlier this week that climate change was heading in the opposite direction, with greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at a record level.
According to ecologists, having a personality means showing a consistent pattern of behavior over time. Researchers from the University of Arizona studied colonies of rock ants across the western U.S., both by following them in the wild and by taking whole colonies back to the lab. They found that certain risky behaviors, like foraging widely for food and responding aggressively to threat, went together, and colonies further north tended to take more of these risks. The study suggests those more adventurous personalities could be an adaptation to the limited window of activity left by the long, snowy northern winter.
For many people, commuting is a necessary evil. Most see going by car or van as the least worst option. This study by the researchers at the University of East Anglia challenges that assumption. It suggests walking, cycling, or traveling by public transport can lift the mood. Crucially, it suggests those who switch from the car active commute feel better across a range of psychological measures, including concentration, decision-making, and the ability to face up to problems. The researchers say policies encouraging people to leave their cars at home could have a dramatic impact on public well-being.
Pop megastars including Adele, Michael Jackson and Sir Elton John have all recorded music at the world-famous Metropolis Studios. Last year, the recording studio set about compiling an album called Lost Songs, which features songs from relatively unknown musicians. First-year student Zach Taylor Frey decided to submit his song demo to be included in Volume 2 of the Lost Songs album, which was released this year, after he saw how successful Volume 1 had been. Zach, 24, said, "I found this competition when simply searching the internet for songwriting competitions one day, and was lucky that there was still time to enter. It amazes me that people who have worked with huge pop stars thought my song was good and worth something."